All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Neil Haley Show. I'm just excited as can be about the great guests when I get to tape for 2 hours, and every week, the Neil Haley Show. And starting out, I have a really interesting guest. I always want to thank Triumph Books. They're the best sports books out there, and I learned so much about different authors, but I want to welcome to the program author Bob Duff. He's the author of 100 Things the Red Wings Should Do, Know, and Do Before They Die. Bob, thanks for calling, and I'm always interested in having a conversation with sports authors, but thanks again for calling, Bob.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I tell you, let's start off with basically one thing to mention in this book. Now, the Red Wings and the Penguins, I'm sure that it maybe didn't make it into the 100 Things, was the Penguins' big win against the Red Wings. I had to bring that up for our Pittsburgh fans. Did it?
No, I don't think that made it on the list. Watching the Wings lose the Stanley Cup isn't one of the 100 things that I think a Red Wings fan wants to do. But there is one unique little item with a Pittsburgh connection. For years, Paul McCartney on his acoustic guitar had a Red Wings logo. And the reason that happened was he played Olympia Stadium when he was in the band Wings, and Olympia Stadium usher gave him a Red Wings logo at the end of the concert, and he affixed it to his guitar. Well, many years later, it just happened that Paul was one of the first acts, I believe maybe even the first act, to play a concert at the Consol Energy Center. And when the Pittsburgh people saw that Red Wings logo on his acoustic guitar, they gave him a Penguins logo, so now the two of them sit side by side on his guitar.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And we all know the success of the Red Wings have had in years, but what about the history of the Red Wings? I'm sure there's something in the 100 Things about specifically how this franchise got started, for sure.
Well, what's fascinating about them is they were granted a franchise when they didn't have an arena. They had guaranteed that Olympia Stadium would be built, but as it turned out, they were a year behind schedule. So the 1926-27 season, the team was then known as the Detroit Cougars, because what had happened was there was a major pro league in Western Canada, and the team called the Victoria Cougars in that league. Well, to fill out their roster that first season, the owners of the Detroit franchise simply bought the majority of the Cougars roster and decided to keep the name. So that's why they started out as the Cougars. They figured with the with the Tigers already in town, and then eventually the Lions would come along. That whole cat theme was something that seemed to fit Detroit. But anyway, since they didn't have an arena, there was no other arena in the Detroit area that they could use. And they actually had to practice outdoors on occasion that first season, because the only ice available in the Michigan area was outdoor rinks. So they ended up playing their entire home schedule that first season across the border in Canada, in Windsor, Ontario, at the Windsor Arena, which still stands in downtown. And so they are the only North American major professional franchise to ever play its entire home schedule in a foreign country.
Oh my! Wow. Now, who would you think was the best ever Red Wing, in your opinion? Who would you say?
I think you have to go with Gordie Howe. I mean, the man could do everything. If you needed a goal, he'd score a goal. If you needed a playmaker, he could do that. If somebody needed to be straightened out, he could take care of that. And in a pinch, and he did many times, played defense for the Red Wings. A dominant all-around player and the best player in the NHL for almost all of his career. And the guy played 26 years in the NHL. And people always ask me what I think Gordie Howe's greatest feat was. And I think, to me, it was when he came back with the Hartford Whalers in the NHL in the 79-80 season and scored 16 goals at the age of 52. And you think about amazing. This season, how many guys in their prime are not going to get 16 goals? I mean, that just shows you what an incredible genetic specimen Gordie Howe was.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to discuss today, and it's kind of funny, I mean, I'm not going to say I have a huge knowledge of the Red Wings. I guess because our rivals are always the Flyers and the Rangers and different things, but all we can remember, is that Stanley Cup. But the whole Russian invasion, and there was a 30-30 special on ESPN that really got involved at the end of with Faceoff and things like that. Now, tell me specifically how this Russian group together won a cup and stuff. That was pretty amazing, some of the talent, right?
It was, and it kind of went against the grain of the NHL at that time. In the early to mid '90s was the era of they call it the dead puck era, when everyone was playing the trap and trying to win games 2-1 and 1-0. And Scotty Bowman, probably the greatest coach in the history of hockey, was in charge of the Red Wings then, and he decided, no, we're not going to play that way. We're going to play up tempo. We're going to play puck possession, and we're going to attack. And he put together this Russian unit. They had got Sergei Fedorov in the draft and smuggled him out of the Goodwill games in Seattle in 1990 to get him to Detroit.
That's
he was
wild.
the first. He was the first one, and then the next year when the walls started coming down and behind the Iron Curtain, they were able to get Vladimir Konstantinov and then Vyacheslav Kozlov out. And then he finished out the unit by probably bringing over the two greatest Russian players of that era and picking up Igor Larionov from San Jose and then Faceoff from New Jersey.
Yeah.
And he played them as a Russian unit and played them, they played that Russian system of puck possession, and they were a dominant group. I mean, you had Yzerman and Shanahan on one line playing that old North American, North and South style and banging people around, and then you send out these tremendous skill players, and
Right.
if you're a coach trying to defend that, I mean, you basically have to come up with two different systems to stop the same team.
You're not going to be able to do that, and I think that it went against the grain in so many ways, because you still have this group of people believe in the, bang it out style of hockey that's not, finesse, lots of goal scores, and that's what made Detroit exciting. And with that team is they could score a lot of goals and were exciting, and then the offense was important. You watch these close games that you don't see a lot of goal scores, but they wanted to really bring that European style, right? It sounds like as Scotty did.
And then one of the things the players told me that they loved about Faceoff, I mean, this was a guy who was 40 years old at the time, and he would, in that era, the defensemen were basically trained to get it off the glass and get it out of the zone and make the puck battle in the neutral zone. Well, Faceoff was old school, and his theory was make a pass, a tape-to-tape pass, and he would take the hit to make that play. And the forwards appreciated him so much for that, because the game at that time, the forwards were the ones taking the beating, because, as I say, the puck was shot into the neutral zone and then the fight was on. And so by him making a tape-to-tape pass, they were moving their feet and they had the defense backpedaling. So it was not only took the battle out of the neutral zone, it forced the defensive team to backpedal and not play the trap.
Exactly. And one of the things you met in the 100 Things is why Chelios is the greatest born American player. You made that case. Tell us about that, Chris Chelios. Mm-hmm.
Now, if you ask any American player of the last 20, 25 years, they all bow in reverence to Chelios. He's the king as far as they're concerned. And I think as much as it's about talent, it's about leadership. I mean, Chelios, has similar qualities to Gordie Howe. He was able to excel in the NHL for over 2 decades, and was a dominant player, and a guy who was probably, if not the most hated visiting player in Detroit when he was a Blackhawk, certainly in the top 2. And when he came here, it was kind of like I don't know, it would be like I'm trying to think of like Claude Lemieux almost coming to the Red Wings. I mean, this guy was reviled in Detroit, and he admitted that. It's funny, he wrote a book himself, and he was telling me he was doing a book signing, and he said so many people come up to me and tell me how much they hated him. And he said, well, that's okay. I hated you guys just as much.
Well, again, we're talking to Bob Duff, author of 100 Things the Red Wings Should Know and Do Before They Die. And I think that when you were asked to be part of this book, it was pretty cool, because you think about specifically coming up with 100 things with this storied franchise that's the Red Wings. That must have been fun, kind of working with your co-author to come up with those 100 things, wasn't it?
And there's so many unique things with the Detroit franchise that have never happened to other teams. They had a player their first season by the name of Jim Riley, who I'm sure 99% of hockey fans have never heard of. Well, Jim Riley was the only, and remains, of course, the only player to play in the NHL and also play Major League Baseball.
Oh, really? Wow.
And he played for the Washington Senators and St. Louis Browns, and also played in the NHL with the Red Wings and the Blackhawks. So he's the only guy that's ever done that. Another thing I found that was kind of fun was Tom Matty. You'll probably remember the old Baltimore Colts running back.
Yeah, I've interviewed him. Yeah.
Yeah, his dad actually played for Detroit in the 29-30 season, and I called Tom and asked him about it, and Tom actually had some memories of his dad at the end of his career. He played mostly in the minor leagues, and Tom told me that hockey was the sport he would have loved to have played, but it just, growing up where in Ohio, it just wasn't a big sport then, and he ended up gravitating to football. But he actually played a lot of hockey. His mom was Canadian, and there was that real hockey roots in his bloodstream. Told me he played some club hockey at Ohio State, and then when he was with the Colts, he used to skate with the Baltimore Clippers, the old AHL team.
Oh my! And
there was a plan afoot to have him suit up for a game because the Clippers were thinking, geez, if we put a Colt in the lineup, we'll pack this place. And when Carol Rosenblum, who was the owner of the Colts at the time, got wind of it, he said, absolutely not.
Interesting, for sure. What would you say would be your favorite of the 100 things that kind of you discovered through research and stuff like that?
Well, probably, again, one that a lot of people don't know about, but I mean, fascinating. It was like a real-life version of The Longest Yard in 1953-54 season. The Red Wings traveled to Marquette State Prison and played a game against the convicts.
Oh, wow.
And Marquette State Prison is not white-collar crime. We're talking about murderers, armed robbers. These are hardcore criminals, and to do that, and it was kind of a fluky thing. They used to do barnstorming tours through northern Michigan and that in the summer to promote the team. And Jack Adams and Ted Lindsay were in Marquette, and this fella came up to them who was the warden at the prison and told them about this great athletic program they had and how they had this wonderful outdoor rink in the yard, and they had a prison league, and they were really proud of how they were rehabilitating these guys through sports. And he said, it'd be wonderful if you guys came and played a game. And Adams, thinking there was no way this would ever happen, said, okay, here's what you need to do. He said, you got to pay our way there. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to guarantee this. And he gave him all these outrageous demands, thinking he'd never hear from the guy again. And sure enough, a couple months later, it's all set. And Adams said, no, I'm a man of my word. We got to go.
That's fantastic.
And they would go on to win the Stanley Cup that year. So, I mean, you're the Stanley Cup champions into a prison to play against hardcore criminals.
That's cool. And again, the 100 things the Red Wings should know and do before they die. You can find information at Triumph Books and also other places. Bob, do you have any place to find information on you? Or you can go?
Oh, I have my own blog, Duffer's Dabbles, on the Windsor Star website. That's got a bio of me. You can follow me on Twitter at @AskTheDuffer.
All right. Well, fantastic, Bob. I enjoyed the discussion. Learned something new about the Red Wings, but you liked how I was able to throw in that penguin dig at the beginning of the interview. But I really learned a lot, and best of luck to you, and best success on the book. So thanks again for calling, Bob.
Oh, you're always welcome.
Take care. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
You're watching the Neil Haley Show Author's Corner segment, and when we get back, another exciting guest. We'll be back in just a moment.
Today we are going to inform you about two types of mental illnesses. First, we are going to tell you about anxiety. Everyone experiences anxiety at one time or another. However, when the anxiety interferes with your life, it's time to consider seeking help. Symptoms of anxiety are uncontrollable and obsessive thoughts, nightmares, shortness of breath, feelings of panic, and fear or uneasiness without reason. Some risk factors for having anxiety are being female, temperament, and stress. One of the most severe forms of anxiety is OCD, or obsessive-compulsive disorder. When someone has OCD, they can't tell the difference between a real threat and an irrational fear. Anxiety disorders are some of the most common mental disorders. If anxiety is interfering with your day-to-day life, then speak with your doctor.
The other mental illness we are covering today is bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder causes unusual shifts in mood, energy, and activity levels. There are two sides to bipolar disorder, mania and depression. Symptoms of mania are an overly happy or outgoing mood, extreme irritability, talking very quickly, jumping around, being easily distracted, being overly restless, sleeping little, and engaging in high-risk behaviors. Symptoms of depression are long periods of sadness, loss of interest, feeling tired, having difficulty concentrating and making decisions, being irritable, changing in eating or sleeping habits, and suicidal thoughts. Risk factors of bipolar disorder are genetics and age. Bipolar disorder is sometimes referred to as a manic depressive illness. If you feel that you or a loved one has bipolar disorder, speak with your doctor. For more information on these mental illnesses and more, visit nim.nih.gov.
We're back to the Neil Haley Show, and did an interesting show to say the least when we already had Bob Duff talk about the Red Wings. Now we're going into an interesting thing. This author is very, very interesting because he really talks about parenting. He talks about scream-free parenting, and that's the big thing. But when you see specific things happening about military families, adjusting the civilian life and all that stuff, that's what Hal's doing. So I want to welcome to the program author, New York Times bestselling author, Hal Runkel. How are you?
I am doing very well. How are you, Neil?
I'm doing fantastic, and we talking about this whole initiative that you have in your books, your best-selling books, Scream-Free Parenting, and then also the other types of scream-free products, and also working with your initiative. Tell us a little about yourself, Hal, and we'll get right into it. I want to go into more of the tips of how we don't raise our voice, especially with children when we're raising kids and stuff, for sure.
Sure. And in many ways, I kind of started this whole thing to help myself first. I'm a marriage family therapist, and so I've got all the training and certifications and all that stuff. But I remember coming out of graduate school just wanting to do something that didn't sound like clinical language or academic language, and ultimately I just recognized that the more I get reactive with my kids, the more I get reactive with my spouse, I don't just make things worse. I actually end up creating the very outcome I was hoping to avoid in the first place. And so what I needed to find a way was just, no matter what, just be cool in the heat of the moment. And I found that with my clients, and so I just started doing seminars about doing that with our kids and spouses and even in our workplace, and they began to get popular and turned into a book, and now we get to go all over the world teaching folks these principles, and it just means there's a universal desire. We all have a desire for fantastic relationships. Yes. It's what we want. It's what we crave most. But sometimes we don't recognize how we actually get in our own way towards creating that. And one of the easiest ways we do that is by getting so emotionally reactive. And so we said, let's be scream-free, no matter what.
That's so important. And when you talk about starting the process, what your big thing is working with military families. Why military families, Hal? For sure. And with
they reached out to us.
Okay.
You know, I had this best-selling book, and I was going around speaking everywhere and doing a lot of TV shows and stuff, and they reached out to us. And so since then, I think that was like 7 years ago, but since then we've made visits, over 150 visits to military installations all over the world. And it's been such an amazing honor. We worked with tens of thousands of families, but these families, you know, we Americans sleep underneath a blanket of security that they provide by willingly sacrificing their lives. And it's not just their individual lives. In so many ways, they sacrifice their family life. You know, I meet so many people, and I hear so many stories, and people, 8 deployments in 10 years. How does a marriage survive that? You know, the divorce rates are, unfortunately, through the roof.
I know.
When they're going through multiple deployments, which is totally understandable. But, you know, we've all heard about suicide and stuff. One of the things I love about the movie American Sniper is what it helped us define, I think, because they did a really good job of showing what's happening on the inside. I think Bradley Cooper did a fantastic job because it's helping us expand our definition of wounded warrior.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because this guy wasn't physically hurt.
Mentally.
But see it.
PTSD and all those different things. So let's talk a little about, and we're going to provide some tips for our families that are not military, but specifically enough what you see with moms or dads who come back from being on deployment and how they deal with civilian life and parenting and relationships. What types of things do you see, and how do you have to break those? Go ahead. Go ahead, Hal.
There used to be an amped up is the deal, and they have to adjust to that environment. So let's say the man is overseas, he's got to be amped up and be constant on alert, and that is a way of being. It's incredibly hypersensitive to anything and everything going on around you. And she, while she's at home, she has got to do so much completely on her own while trying to push back emotionally the whole deal that at any time I could get the phone call. At any time I could drive home from the grocery store and see the car parked out in front of the duplex, and I know that car. It's the one that's bringing the bad news because they've seen it happen. And then when they come back, they're just different. They're just changed. I mean, obviously, physically wounded warriors or traumatic brain injury stuff, I mean, that you deal with that forever. But even those that haven't, the PTSD is very, very real, and there's just things you can't unsee. And so I mean, story after story of guys waking up choking their wives, guys waking up, they're on patrol in their house when they're asleep, and so we are taxing these families and asking them to do more in many ways than any Americans have ever asked their military to do. We're talking about the longest continuous war in U.S. history. And we've never had this many married members, and we've never had this many repeat deployments. But also one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot is, in World War II, it was 4.5 years, and we lost, 500,000 people. Well, now it's been all this time, but we've only lost 10,000 or so, or less than that, because now we are able to save them with injuries that used to kill them, but now they have to come back and deal with these injuries. Neil, I was at Fort Hood a few months ago, and talking to a group on parenting teenagers. Okay, and there's a guy there. He's got a titanium leg, and I don't want to be too graphic here, but half of his face was missing. Just caved in, just gone, right? But he's now walking around and he's healthy. But when I talked to him afterwards, all I wanted to do was talk to him about, how are you doing with your injuries? And he's like, thank you for that concern. I got plenty of people talking to me about that. But I'm here because I'm still a dad.
Right? And that's the important thing. He sees the importance of being a dad and how to deal with those things, for sure.
And so here's what we've been able to do is let them know, look, what made you a success on the battlefield was your ability to keep your cool in the heat of the moment. And that's exactly what your family needs you to do now, is learn to keep your cool in the heat of the moment. When it's the witching hour, 6 o'clock, and dinner's not ready, and everybody's tired and hungry and at each other's throats. Your ability to keep your cool will define how your family goes. When your spouse is angry and upset that at the Army and this choice that you guys made to join, and she doesn't want to do it anymore, your ability to keep your cool and listen to your spouse will determine that. And so they get it. I mean, snipers, that's one of the things they show in, American snipers. They got to have this amazing calm their breath, their heart rate down, right? But that's what makes you a success in that arena.
It definitely makes you a success, Hal. And when I think about this, kind of equating this to regular parenting, the same things happen, but not in the same scale. But the dad, if he's working a lot and he gets home, and mom's a stay-at-home mom, or two working parents, but the dad still gets home later, how does he respond and not try to take over, but be there to take over? And that's part of the whole relationship thing. Is he going to help empty the dishwasher, put the kids to bed, do specific things, but not blow up at anyone when maybe the high tensions are there? So screaming free. When you don't scream, what happens, Hal, that kids are more willing to listen to people if you don't scream? Explain that.
Yeah, we have this. It's interesting. I'll speak in front of a crowd of 10,000 people, right? And I will just start to speak softer.
Yes.
Right, and slower. And it's amazing. I'll say, look what happens when I speak softer. You're paying more attention than you were before. It's this amazing thing that we respect people in a position of authority who are able to be both calm and present at the same time. That they're in the midst of it, right? Yes. I'm in the kitchen, right, when everything's going crazy, and I'm paying attention to everything, but I'm not freaking out or trying to control anything other than me.
Yeah.
And it has this amazing effect. It's infectious. But it's the hardest thing to do.
It's probably it's so difficult because you go into the midst of everything. You're used to all day, specifically, trying to put up fires or different. I'm just looking at my position as an entrepreneur, how I get home and I take over, but then one bad little thing happens and I could blow up. Like, oh my gosh, I was here during the day, keeping everything in order. You guys get home, I go and work later in the day, come home, and how do I stay from scream free? It's interesting. We look at punishment, how we look at, corporal punishment. We look at specifically yelling at kids. If you're consistent, put them in a timeout, explain to them why they've done something wrong, understand rules and regulations. You're in a much better situation, aren't you, Hal? And then screaming or hitting. Get
there. Right, and the only way you can get there, and this is what we tell folks, if you want to be scream free, the only way you get there is if you make that your number one priority. That no matter what, I'm going to stay cool. And no matter what, I'm going to even be a good parent. No, I'm not even going to think about that. I'm just going to think about keeping my cool because that enables me to be consistent.
Well,
because I see things for what they are. I don't see them as any bigger than they are. We freak out when we see the moment and we think it's some threat to the whole foundation of the family. We think, my wife coming home, telling me that a guy hit on her, and I could say, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out and see this as the beginning of the end. Or I can keep my cool and say, well.
Exactly. Oh, wow, Hal. Where's the best place we can find information on you and learn more about you? And go to a website, and also we can find your books.
Yeah, website, ScreamFree.com. You can buy the books anywhere. They're available, Amazon and bookstores everywhere. But ScreamFree.com. We are a nonprofit organization, and so we've got so many free resources available. Because all we want to do is help people stay cool so they can learn how to handle any moment in the moment. And you can find everything you need to do that on the website, ScreamFree.com.
All right, well, Hal, fantastic. Best of luck to you. I hope everything goes really well. And we'll talk soon and maybe have you back on and provide some more parenting tips. So thanks again for calling, Hal.
Thanks, Neil.
All right, take care. All right, that was the Neil Haley Show. Great show, two very interesting guests. You can go to my website, toldtutor.net, for more information. Twitter, toldtutor, Neil S. Haley. Facebook, LinkedIn, Neil Haley, Instagram. And we'll talk next week on the Neil Haley Show. Good day.
BPTV. Come volunteer. If it wasn't fun, I wouldn't be here.
BPTV. Come on in, make a show. It's still fun after all these years.